Westuhal min friend and welcome to yet another video. Hypocrites and adaptations, my dear friends. Those two words are being discussed more and more today. But of course, there have always been hypocrites and there have always been adaptations, really, since the dawn of storytelling. Myths and legends have been retold over and over again. But let's just focus on more recent matters, shall we? Of course, then, please look at the screen. These two men are very, very popular writers, contemporary living writers whose works of art have been adapted into TV shows and films and video games and so on and so forth. And they have, of course, claimed a huge amount of popularity all over the world. But one of them, especially Neil Gaiman, he is very well known for shifting his opinions one way or another, the way it suits him, or it really depends on how much one movie studio or another pays him. We are talking about Neil Gaiman here. And recently he has had a discussion with George R.R. Martin, yet another famous writer, the author of The Song of Ice and Fire that has been adapted into Game of Thrones. And then more recently, of course, his Fire and Blood has been adapted into the House of the Dragon. Please feel free to check out my reviews of the individual episodes if you haven't done so already. Now, of course, Neil Gaiman there is famous for, among other things, writing the Sandman series of comic books that was coming out since the end of the 1980s, I believe, under the Vertigo imprint at DC Comics. It was very popular at the time, being one of the revolutionary comic books that brought the medium among the more adult and mature audience. He was not the first one, he was not the last one, he wasn't even the most prominent one, and he most certainly wasn't the best one. But he was one of them. He was also one of the group, unofficial group, that is being labeled as the British invasion into the American comic book industry, where there was a time when the most popular writers of the American comic books were all British. Alan Moore and Grant Morrison, and of course, Neil Gaiman. Well, of course, when there is this Netflix thingy today, everything is being adapted into TV shows and films, and so was his Sandman series. And of course, because it's 2022, storytelling and being faithful to the source material has to be put aside instead of it bowing down to the gods of inclusion, representation, and diversity takes place. And of course, Mr. Gaiman has been involved in it a lot. And he has been labeling fans istophobes when they were not satisfied with the casting of certain characters, death specifically, which of course was race-swapped. And then they got rid of, John Constantine, and in his stead, there was, I think, Joanna Constantine, his niece or something. And of course, he was vehemently defending these decisions, these creative decisions. I don't know if he really, truly, honestly agreed with these changes, or that only his pocket, his wallet agreed with it, but he did attack his own fans for loving his comic book that he wrote over 30 years ago. But of course, then he dabbled into something that he really should have stayed silent about. And that's, of course, Professor Tolkien and the abhorrent The Rings of Power. He has been defending The Rings of Power a lot. And in one of the tweets, he even stated that as a schoolboy, he did not like the Silmarillion, and that he actually prefers The Rings of Power as a prequel. Now, putting that aside, putting that stupid and idiotic statement aside, now he's shifting sides again. He's turning 180 degrees, and it just made me laugh and chuckle how much hypocritical these authors are. And then instead of putting themselves into writing over and over again, they are being active on social media more and more, and in many cases more than in their own writing. So shall we look at the article by bounding into comics and look at the latest joke diarrhea that they have spewed from their mouths. George R. R. Martin and Neil Gaiman claim they hate Hollywood's tendency to alter source material. So once again, both these men are very well known for defending the changes that have been done to their own works. But then again, you get a lot of money, you will say anything. Despite the numerous such changes seen in the recent live-action adaptations of their respective works, Game of Thrones scribe George R. R. Martin and The Sandman creator Neil Gaiman have claimed they despise Hollywood's tendency to unnecessarily alter a given piece of source material when adapting it to the small or silver screens. The two storied authors gave their thoughts on Hollywood's obligation to be faithful to the written material during an October the 27th speaking engagement at New York City's Symphony Space. As reported by Variety, the event was hosted by Gaiman and held as part of Martin's promotional tour for his upcoming The Rise of the Dragon, an illustrated history of the Targaryen dynasty, Volume 1 reference book. Instead, I think he should have written a huge chunk of Winds of Winter, but we will get to that in another video. Speaking to a number of topics related to his career, including how he handled his success and even his desire to hear feedback from fans, maybe you're gonna throw rotten fruit at me, maybe you're going to applaud, but I want to know what you thought of the story and the characters. Martin eventually turned to discuss Hollywood's propensity for overwriting an author's original intent. Noting that this concept of being faithful to source materials was controversial among the industry, Martin explained, "How faithful do you have to be? Some people don't feel that they have to be faithful at all. There's this phrase that goes around. I'm going to make it my own," the writer continued. "I hate that phrase, and I think Neil probably hates that phrase too." To this, Gaiman explicitly confirmed, "I do. I spent 30 years watching people make Sandman their own," he recalled, "and some of those people hadn't even read Sandman to make it their own. They just flipped through a few comics or something." However, recognizing that certain changes are sometimes necessary to help translate a story to a completely different medium, Martin then proceeded to clarify his opinion, asserting there are changes that you have to make, or that you're called upon to make, that I think are legitimate. There are other ones that are not legitimate. To illustrate his point, Martin harkened back to his work adapting the sci-fi author Roger Zelazny's story The Last Defender of Camelot for an episode of the late 1980s Twilight Zone revival. According to Martin, due to budgetary restrictions put in place by CBS, the network forced him to choose between accentuating a battle scene with either a full unit of horses or a detailed backdrop. Eventually, after consulting with Zelazny himself, he chose to cut the warriors' steeds, a decision which Martin argued was, to my mind, the kind of stuff we are called upon to do in Hollywood that is legitimate. Conversely, the author offered up the studio's demand that the episode add an ordinary person, the bandit Tom, as portrayed by John Cameron Mitchell, to both serve as an audience surrogate and elevate the story to their vision of high concept. As an example of an illegitimate change, I was new to Hollywood, Martin lamented. I didn't say, "You're morons." As noted above, this rhetoric is particularly coming from Gaiman and Martin, considering the various creative liberties they are not only allowed, but outright endorsed in Hollywood's take on their seminal stories. When The Sandman made the leap to Netflix, the iconic characters of Death and John Constantine were race and gender swapped respectively out of Gaiman's desire, as described by producer Alan Heinberg, to make the series as inclusive as possible. So as you can see, bounding into comics, they are claiming that it was Gaiman's desire after all. Gaiman even seems to have outright approached his original work with the intent to alter it. In an August interview with UK news outlet Express, the author touted how it was incredibly liberating to be able to look at everything in Sandman from a perspective of now, and getting to ask, well, if I was beginning writing this story now, would I still do that? This is to say nothing of the changes HBO has made to Martin's work under his watch. Aside from Game of Thrones' absolute butchering, which Martin has admitted was the regrettable result of him allowing himself to be pushed out of the series' creative process, the characters and events of his sequel-prequel series, House of the Dragon, have also seen their fair share of changes in the transition to television. These include House Velaryon being race-swapped, Leonor surviving his duel with Sir Carl Corey, and perhaps most notably, Alicent and Rhaenyra developing the close childhood friendship upon which much of the adaptation's narrative is built. Suffice it to say, reality contrasts starkly with Gaiman and Martin's professed sentiments. House of the Dragon is said to begin filming its second season in early 2023. Meanwhile, there have been no confirmed plans for a second season to The Sandman, but I have read on social media, on Twitter, that it has been confirmed that the second season of The Sandman is in... Well, it will happen. I'm not going to watch it anyway. I haven't even watched the first season because I'm just not interested in an adaptation that alters the source material that much. I have suffered through The Rings of Power, and that will be sufficient as far as bad adaptations for a long time. Let me know in the comments down below what you think about these two spineless men. Do you believe them? Do you believe a single word they utter? And that will be all. Thank you very much for watching, and I'm out of here.